Good morning, Spark Festival attendants. We are so excited to have you with us at this very in Australia. For Dom and I, United States, this is afternoon, so it's not too bad. But thanks for joining. Our panel session is around taking your Australian venture to the United States, and you're going to hear from really successful founders on how they've done it. They've all done it in different ways and different things to get a really well-rounded conversation. I thought our time with having each of our three founders give a little bit of an intro about themselves and their venture, and then I've got a series of round-robin questions to ask. If we have time at the end, we will definitely take some Q&A. Okay. So, Tanya, we hear from you first. Tell us about you and what you do, and a little on DNA.
Sure. Thanks, Heather. First cab off the rank this morning. Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. It's a real privilege to be here. As Heather said, Tanya Jolly, co-founder and managing director of DNA Security Solutions. We started our startup about 15 years ago, so we're really more of a scale-up these days. And our journey's been quite different, I guess, maybe to many of yours. We're a widget company. So we've actually got a hard product as opposed to a service. And that brings up its challenges in both scale and being in ease of sort of being able to sell. But we'll talk a bit more about that later. What our product does is a technology that we've developed that is a criminal marking technology. So we mark and tag the criminals at the crime scenes at the time that the crimes occur with a unique forensic evidence-based spray. So it's the one piece of the missing link that police currently have when they turn up to a crime scene. They've got cameras, there's got eyewitness statements, but there's never a forensic physical link between criminal and crime scene. And that's the technology that we've developed. We've been very laser focused on it, and it seamlessly integrates into any security system for any business or home if you need it. So yeah, that's us really, and we're solving that problem of lack of evidence, DNA evidence to be able to identify and then capture a criminal.
Awesome. Thank you for that introduction, Tanya. Dom, you look like you're on a football field. Are you trying out for the NFL?
This is one of our lovely living walls in our office, and that I love to sit in front of. So I'm Dom. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Fast. We're the one-click checkout for the entire internet with no passwords. I moved to the US last year to really launch Fast here. And, there was 2 of us in November. There's now 65 of us. And I think we've raised $22.5 million US in the last 12 months or nearly 12 months. So it's been a really hell of a journey.
Yes, I've got some questions for you. I've got questions for each of you around raising venture capital or bootstrapping. So we'll get to those later, but thank you. And is your lovely family with you in the Bay Area, or are they still back in Australia?
Yes, I'm very lucky to have my family here at the moment. They went back to Australia for a few months during COVID, but they're here now, and we're living in Palo Alto down in South Bay. It's very nice.
Awesome. Well, good luck surviving our elections in a few weeks.
Thanks.
Michelle, could you please introduce yourself to the panel and to the audience?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Perugini. I'm co-founder and CEO of an AI healthcare company called Prestogen. We work in the women's health space, and we create scalable AI products that we can solve particular women's health applications. And we've got a first product called Life Whisperer that uses AI to take images of embryos during the IVF process and helps doctors to decide which one is most likely to lead to a pregnancy for patients. And I guess we've had a really interesting journey. This is my second AI company. First one we bootstrapped. We also did quite a bit of work in the US with that first company. But this one here, we're kind of raising capital, and that raises a whole series of additional challenges cross-border, and particularly with kind of dealing with US investors and so forth. And we're also expanding to the US. We've got really strong clinical partnerships over there. So kind of straddling time zones and looking to scale. But yeah, that particular product's approved in 2/3 of the world's market now, and we're kind of expanding rapidly.
That's awesome. Congratulations. And great segue. I have questions for each of you, but let's jump right into a topic that I think will be of great interest to the people who are tuning in, and that's venture capital. To get it, to not get it, how to get it, how were you successful getting it? I'll set up here for our audience. Tanya, she mentioned in her intro, she and her co-founder have bootstrapped their entire company using revenue. And maybe other means that she'll tell us about. But they have bootstrapped their entire venture, including their international expansion. And then we'll talk to Dom about the incredible amount of money that he's raised here in the US. 22.5 million is a healthy round. Congratulations, Dom. And then Michelle, I know you've raised money from both Australian and American investors, and I'd love to talk to you about your experience, the differences between the two, and that kind of thing. So Tanya, let's get started with you and tell us how you came to make the decision, or did it just sort of happen along the way, or was this a plan from the beginning to not take on investors and not dilute your position? Can you just kind of walk us through what you've done?
Yeah, sure. Look, we never really had a set plan. Our plan was that we were actually asked to develop this technology by the South Australian Police back in about 2004, because this was a really serious problem that they were dealing with, trying to be looking for the criminal but never having the required evidence to really gain the number of convictions that they wanted. So we thought it was a fantastic idea, and my co-founder and husband, who is an electrical engineer, had the smarts to be able to develop a system really quite quickly. And we had another business that we exited out of that we used as a bit of a cash cow during the whole R&D process. So we were busy, and I guess maybe 15 years ago when we started, raising capital wasn't really something that ordinary people got to do. It was just at the beginning of when the whole conversation was starting. And so it really wasn't on our radar. We just knew that we could get a product, a beta product out to the market. And I guess as our journey has gone, we've looked at opportunities along the way, and we've gone out to market in the very early stages. So that's when venture capital and angel investing was very, very young, and I'd have to say very immature here in Australia. And so the road was very, very difficult, and a much more difficult conversation we had back sort of 10 years ago. And I'd have to say, unfortunately, being a female founder, I also had an enormous stigma 10 years ago in that was not an accepted proposition, really. You had to have and everybody was looking for the next Facebook at that stage as well. So we were sort of really in the whole, online services, product categories that were booming. And so widgets weren't exactly top of mind, or, the favorite lolly in the lolly shop at that stage. So we just decided that we knew that we had a really amazing product, and that we were solving a really big issue and a big problem that we now know that police have globally, and that everybody has globally, really, when we're trying to solve the problem of crime. And so given that it was a global problem, we were very confident that we could get scalability. And so we just kept going, and sort of each month, each year, we'd look at different sort of opportunities as they arose. But in the early days, I think what we do is, even now, as you know, Heather, so significantly different and out of the box when it comes to typical legacy security problems, security technology, that we've really needed the market and the community to catch up with us. So we were so far ahead of the market in its thinking and its acceptance of what security technology should look like, that we've needed, I guess, the likes of, the CSI crime shows and all the different sort of police television shows that, talk about DNA evidence and analysing it and, all that sort of stuff. And just as a quick tidbit, it doesn't happen in an hour either. So it normally takes quite a significant longer time than that to analyse DNA. But it's about, I guess, creating a vision, and we've always had that vision. We knew that it could be really successful, and I guess we've just been really fortunate that we've had some great customers along the way who have invested. And so probably a great point to make here is that not all investment needs to come from a VC or an angel. And so we've always appreciated our customers as investors, because they're investing in our vision and they're putting their money behind it. And whilst it's much smaller and a greater proportion of the population that you need to get, your customers, your early stage customers, are actually your investors. And I'd really encourage, that there's a lot of startups out there that they really embrace that, because it is another way of thinking about investment. And obviously government grants, get your head around whatever government grants are available. We utilised, we've never had any massive grants. I think the largest grant that we've had so far has been about $65,000. But the small ones, there's a lot of small ones out there, both state and federally, that depending on what industry that you're in, that you possibly could get. And so if you can string a couple of those together, it's pretty easy to be, and then using your R&D tax incentives, and for those that are looking to export, your EMD G grants, they come in very handy. So yeah, that's how we bootstrap.
Awesome. It's a great story.
Thanks.
Michelle, you have raised a combination of US and Aussie early stage capital, and I'm wondering if you can talk to us about some of the differences, if there are any, in how you go about raising money from Australian investors versus US investors. And then we're going to chat with Dom about his big US raise and his best practices for that. But Michelle, can you talk to us a little bit about any of the differences you encountered along the way, culturally, or, with regard to a timeline or due diligence or anything like that?
Yeah, sure. I'm also super keen to hear about Dom's experience in raising that, because we're just embarking on our Series A of a similar quantum in the US at the moment.
Oh, so, perfect. I'm also a matchmaker. You didn't know.
Very interesting. So we raised our seed round. We kind of bootstrapped the first 2 years of our company through clinical studies from a previous exit of our other company as well. And then unlike my previous company, which we bootstrapped the whole time, healthcare is really difficult because it's highly regulated, very litigious. If you've got a global first approach for a product, you've got different regulatory environments in every country in the world and different sort of requirements for software and deployment, and it's quite a challenging space, and so it is quite capital intensive. And so this time around we kind of sought to engage investment. So our seed round was relatively small. It kind of came from a mix of government grant as well as US VC and Australian local high net wealth individuals. That was fabulous for the seed round, and we've got a really amazing group of investors that have been highly supportive. What I would say, though, is that coming to a very large Series A round, it becomes increasingly more difficult to get a lead out of Australia. And the reason is not necessarily that there's not enough capital here, but the type of capital and the type of company that we are, is quite difficult to get Series A funding here. So our experience has been that in the tech space and with healthcare in particular, the US investors are a little more mature. They understand the space and they've already dealt with many other AI companies where they know the challenges that those companies have had, and therefore they understand some of the problems that we're solving around scalability of AI products. They also have, because the funds are big enough and because the market's very large comparable to Australia, they also have very specific parts of their fund that are dedicated to healthcare, for example, where we don't really have that in Australia. We've got some broad-based investors that, sure, they might dabble in healthcare and they might dabble in tech, but they're not really specific kind of healthcare-focused investors. So that's what we found with the value investors. They've been really good from that perspective. They really hone in and have a focus in digital health. And I think just the maturity around the actual investment process is very different as well. So they're very quick to make a decision, yes or no. They're very quick to move through to that diligence stage. And cut you loose if it's not a fit, which is actually really helpful, because when you're having these investment meetings, you need hundreds or, tens, if not hundreds of them to find the right match. So I think there's definitely a maturity advantage with US investors. I think there's also obviously a capital advantage. It's a much bigger market. And so that's been our experience. But there are some really amazing kind of seed stage and Series A investors in Australia, depending on the type of industry you're in.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for sharing with us your experience there, Michelle. Dom, you have raised a truly impressive amount of capital in a short amount of time, $22.5 million US. Please take us on that journey. Tell us some of the lessons that you've learned in raising capital in America, especially in Silicon Valley. Maybe some things that you would have done differently if there are any, and just any overall tips that you have for the folks who are tuning in, who are looking to start raising significant amounts of capital in the US, like Michelle.
Yeah, so we raised an angel round in Sydney in May last year, a $600,000 Australian angel round, 400,000 American. Caught the next plane to the US and started building networks. Didn't come here to raise capital, was coming here to build a business, and I wanted the company to get based in the US. So we set up shop, just building networks of people to come on board, help grow the business, and just meeting interesting people. And quite naturally sort of was introduced to a lot of, I was introduced to Stripe almost immediately after I got here, just as a sort of natural conversation. I was introduced to lots of VCs and lots of engineers and just lots of interesting people in the ecosystem, and sort of aggressively went after every introduction I could get, and sort of wanted to understand, threw myself into the ecosystem to understand, how it worked here, right? How it was all built. I came here to build a business because we're building a consumer scale network, right? Is the sort of success of our company is really at large scale success. Means when we've got tens of millions of consumers using the product, or millions, or tens of millions, or hundreds of millions, or billions. And most of the engineers in the world who've worked at that scale happen to live in like a few postcodes, so there's a few zip codes here. Yeah. And so I wanted to build a business here because of that, and the strength of the ecosystem, both in terms of talent and capital. And so I went aggressively at building networks here, and then building the business here. We raised a $2.5 million pre-seed round closed in October last year, so about 12 months ago now. And I was introduced to Jan at Index from my now co-founder Alison here, who was at Uber prior to Fast. And to be honest, I had breakfast with Jan, and he committed on the spot. It was our first meeting. He hadn't seen a pitch deck. It was introed from Alison, so I had a sort of warm intro. But the reality is, he completely understood what we were building, completely understood the vision, really bought into that. He saw I was very hungry to build this and see it succeed, and he had early conviction. And I think that is like something that is very rare, or if not almost impossible, from the Australian market to kind of see. It's still, that level of early conviction is still rare in the US, but is more common than Australia. And anyway, so we closed that round, very quickly, and had a lot of momentum from there, and really then set out to build a business and build the strongest team we could get. I think I interviewed 100 engineers from that before we hired our first engineer. So really just hit the ground running. And, from there, we spent a lot more time with a lot of people, including Stripe, who is obviously one of the biggest payment networks in the world, and have one of the biggest, bases of merchants who are our primary customer, in the world as well. And spend more time with them. And over the course of a few months, we obviously made a lot of progress as a business and started building a really, a large and impressive team and product. And a partnership with Stripe became more obvious as something that I think both companies would be interested in going after. And we spoke with them about leading our Series A. And they absolutely understood what we were building. They understood the problem that we were solving because they're in this sort of a similar space. And again, really saw the traction that we were getting in a small amount of time. And so Stripe again offered to lead our Series A. And we're lucky to have in both rounds had a number of angel investors come on board as well. I think I highly value angel investors, probably higher than any other type of investors. These are it's not about just wealthy people. It's about people in the sector, people who can add value. As I said, we're building a consumer scale network. We have the ex-CEO of Twitter as an angel investor, ex-CEO of LinkedIn as an angel investor, and a whole range. Brian Sugar, who's on our board, was the CEO of Pop Sugar, a company, a huge media network here. And so, I think we were just sort of very thoughtful and aggressive about building a large scale consumer network, and we've shown very quickly that we were able to build large networks in short amount of time, and I think that's really helped the cause. But typically, the thing about US venture capital is they really have to believe that the market opportunity is huge, that that really the company has a viable path to $100 million a year in revenue or more for it to really be a sort of interesting venture scale bet here. The reality is they're more than content knowing that 70-80% of their portfolio doesn't make money. And so because of that, 20% of their bets have to win a lot of money, have to make a huge amount of money. So one, the market needs to be big enough to support that. And I think the difference between Australia and the US is there's not many markets within or sectors within Australia that could support businesses with those sort of revenues. That's entire industries, may not have those sort of revenues, let alone one company out of a whole, sea of competitors. And so, that's why natively it could be a bit easier to raise money in the US because the market can support much bigger businesses. But yeah, I think that they're very much more vision driven, understand, they will value the opportunity and will back you to, build a big business. And, whereas I think Australian venture capital tend to want to de-risk earlier in the stage, in the company's life cycle.
Well, I thought you brought up a couple of interesting points there, Dom. And one of the things that I talk about both with Aussie and US founders that I'm either coaching or mentoring or advising is that there are different ways to look at capital and to look at investors. And you mentioned, really liking the early stage investors. That's the space that I play in primarily. And I'm always encouraging startups to look for what I call active smart capital. So they not only have the money, but they are interested and excited in helping you reach foundational customers or opening doors for you or hiring a product manager. They know the greatest person for this or for that, or getting you into a clinical trial that it would take you a year to get into that they can maybe fast track in 4 weeks. All of that reduces the burn rate of the cash that you do have. And so I do encourage founders to look at fundraising and funds in different ways, right? Because you can have the cash, but to me, in certain circumstances, I've seen the connections be equally, if not more, powerful than the actual money. And it looks like from some of the nods, you guys are agreeing. So Michelle, I wanted to ask you, how did you know when the right time was to bring Life Whisperer to the United States? Was it hitting a certain KPI? Was it having a certain number of customers? I know because you're in the medical space, I'm guessing you had to have an FDA clearance of some sort to bring the product to America. But kind of what was your thought process as an Australian founder to say, yeah, now's the time, right? Dom moved the whole family and everything right away. You're managing your business out of South Australia primarily. as is Tanya, and I'd like to hear Tanya's perspective on this next. But can you tell us, Michelle, what for you made you know that it was time to expand Life Whisper outside of Australia?
From day one. So we started the business already knowing that the US was going to be our biggest international target market. It's actually not the biggest market for our product, but it's a very important one from the perception of the quality of technology that is developed with US-based clinical partners. So we don't have FDA approval yet, so we're not actually selling in market, but we have very strong clinical partnerships there, and all of our clinical studies have been conducted out of the US. Our clinical advisory for Life Whisperer is a US-based advisory of 3 key opinion leaders in the market there. And so I think we always, as a company, we always say that we've had a global first approach from day one. And I really mean that. If you're going to expand these products, particularly in the AI space, it's kind of Dom's got a specific need for his business to build a large marketplace, which means that you need to be in a large market. For us, it's a little bit of a different problem. AI products don't typically scale well unless you build them on international data sets that represent different clinical and patient demographics. And so we've had to take this global first approach to collect data from all around the world, to run studies in the US, in Europe, in Australia. So we're a global company. So that's been a very conscious effort on our behalf. And we do operate the business out of Australia, but as you would well know, Heather, you have to spend time in the markets that are your big markets. And, that means kind of lots of travel or relocation or whatever it may be. But, we were in the US at least sort of, I don't know, every month or 2 months for a period of time. So we're kind of pseudo US and Australia based, and I don't think you can do it without that. And so the US market's incredibly important from a funding perspective for us. It's where all the major investors are, and completely echo Dom's points in the need to just develop those networks and stay close to those investors and track your progress. Unfortunately for us, COVID's been very challenging in that regard. Trying to raise a Series A without being on the ground is incredibly difficult. Not being able to sit in the same room as those investors and have those really personal meetings is really difficult. And so that's annoying, but I think, in ordinary terms, you really just need to embed yourself in that ecosystem and meet as many people as you possibly can, and you will find those right connections. And completely agree. The Australian market's quite conservative. There are some really amazing kind of investors here for certain product types and certain companies. And certainly our seed round investors have been incredibly supportive and very helpful from a commercial perspective. But it's just no denying that the US is a huge market and there's just more capital there.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great segue for you, Tanya, because you are also managing your global venture from Adelaide, from South Australia. And so could you talk to the audience a little bit about how you've set up a system to be able to do both of those things, what issues you've encountered and how you've mitigated them? And then certainly, I think it's very top of mind for every single person tuning into this conference or not, is how we do business in the time of COVID. When borders are closed and you can't take meetings, I know it's affected my business. I spend over half the year in Australia, and now I'm in my apartment. So can you talk to us a little bit about the challenges that you faced in terms of managing a global expansion from there, and now especially with the additional burden of not being able to travel to America?
Sure. Thanks, Heather. Look, I just have to echo everything that Michelle and Dom have spoken to. I think you just cannot, you can't stress how important it is to actually get in front of these people, and it doesn't really matter. I mean, my experience with attempted expansion in a number of different geographical regions, and I don't think it really matters where it is that you're going. You have to get yourself over there physically, and you have to, create those networks. And if I can leave one parting, comment and thought with everybody that's listening today. It's network. That is how you're going to grow. That's how you're going to grow your business, both from a capital investment stage and from a customer stage, and getting people talking about it and getting people excited. You've got to get out there and meet people. But for us, I think, the challenge of sheer distance and not being able to travel, has hit us all incredibly hard. It doesn't really matter whether you're a service-based tech or a widget tech business. But I guess one of the things that has helped us is that we created a tech that was incredibly reliable and resilient. So, and very easy actually to install and easy to fix. We have a very, very, very low rate of failure. So that's, the best thing. You want to build something. If you're building a widget type product, make sure that you build it and it doesn't break. Really, we built it with what we call the idiot factor in mind. So we kind of went to the lowest common denominator and thought, well, okay, like if those people can deal with it and install it and fix it or service it, then, moving on up the scale, it was only going to get easier and easier. So that's, one of the things that we've been able to do very successfully. Is build a technology that's like incredibly easy to both install and from the user perspective, very, very easy to integrate into their business. Obviously Zoom, or Teams, or however you choose, to connect electronically across the world, has been an amazing technology to allow us all to still keep our hand in the game during COVID. So I'm eternally grateful to all of those digital tech gurus across the world that have developed these platforms and allowed us to stay connected. That's been amazing. I think, excuse me, one of the really big issues that I guess that we've had and experienced with distance and not being able to get over to any jurisdiction that we go to is reference checking. That's been one of the really big things. So when we've been looking to onboard team members, it's very, very difficult to do, really good, rigorous reference checking of the people that are coming to you. So, everybody can sit in front of a Zoom camera lens and they look fabulous, from the chest up. And they tell you everything that you want to hear, and everything's written on paper, and obviously it looks fantastic. So I think the US is probably one of those cultures that I have found that is incredibly gifted at being able to talk up their skills and their achievements and potentially embellish a little bit more than what Australians tend to do. We tend to be a little bit more humbled when we talk about ourselves and our successes. So I think those navigating those waters is quite tricky. And as Dom spoke to a little bit, and I'm sure would agree, all of the really smart, really gifted US people are pretty much already taken up. So it is really difficult. You've got to try and get them in between a venture, so they've exited one or they're looking for the next thing, and you've got to be in front of them, and knowing whether they're genuine or not is very, very difficult to do from such an enormous distance.
Well, I've got a couple more questions I want to ask you, and then we're going to try something that Heather has not done before. We've got Q&A coming in like crazy. So we've got 17 minutes left. So I'd like to ask just a couple more questions, and then I'm going to don my old lady glasses here and try to read through some of these questions that have been coming in from the audience for you guys, if that sounds good. One question for Michelle. Talk to me, one of the first things I learned on my first trip coming to Australia and getting involved in the startup ecosystem was a phrase that I had never heard, and I don't think many Americans are familiar with, and that's tall poppy syndrome. And it was such anathema to me coming out of, my career is both in corporate America and in startups, and the whole concept was very foreign to me. But I know it's very real in Australia. And so I'm wondering if you have any advice for people who are sort of stuck in that tall poppy syndrome phase, maybe afraid to take their business to the next level, to go global. What worked for you? And if the other two of you want to chime in quickly on this too, I'm watching our countdown clock, but I'm curious, what does an Aussie founder need to do from a mental mindset to get over that tall poppy syndrome and feel like you belong on the global stage?
I think, Heather, that could have gone either way. I taught you many phrases that we probably don't want to mention on this call. I'm glad it was that one that you've asked me about.
No, that was okay though.
So tall poppy syndrome, definitely real. I think in Australia is quite difficult. Everyone wants you to do okay, but not too well. And I think that's quite difficult, but it is kind of a mindset, right? So in my mind, I don't care about things like that. I know I'm building a global business. I know that the tech we've developed is world class. And the reason I know that is because I've traveled far and wide, and I spend time in the US, and I pitch against other companies. And that's what gives you the confidence to say, what we have created is world class and better than anything else I've seen in this space in Europe, in Asia, in the US. So I think the only way that you can kind of get that confidence and rise above it is to get out of that ecosystem and experience what it's like elsewhere, so that you've got a baseline to compare yourself against, which is an actual baseline. And what I always tell entrepreneurs in Australia is, and this is not a negative comment about Australians, right? It's just a cultural difference. It's just a difference in the kind of entrepreneurial mindset. But what I always tell entrepreneurs in Australia is you really need to venture outside to understand how your skills and tech relate on a global stage if you are building a global company, and don't always look to build local first, because sometimes the advice that you get or the feedback that you get from customers here is very different to the feedback that you'll get from customers elsewhere because of that cultural difference. So yeah, I think just venture out broad and wide and make sure that you engage in different ecosystems and different environments so that you get a really good view and build that confidence that you are building something that is globally relevant.
Great answer. Thank you. Anybody else have anything to add before we move to Q&A?
No, I just absolutely there.
Yeah. All right. Well, Dom, the first question is from you. This is from Paul Adler. And he said, for Dom, how is networking and developing relationships different in the US than Australia?
Look, I would say, not networking. When I talk about networking, I'm not talking about going to events and like handing out business cards at the end and kind of doing like the awkward mingling. And so the way I think of networking is the same, like universally, right? It's about it's about just connecting with people, especially people who are going to be relevant to you. And typically it's like if you can offer them value, or it's an exchange of value, but finding connecting with people and getting people to connect with your mission. I don't think that there's any difference, to be honest. I think that here, the thing about like this area, the Bay Area, the Silicon Valley Bay Area, is that it's an incredibly dense group of people who are here building tech companies, right? And building and scaling tech
geographically.
And so, yeah, geographically dense, yeah. And so the reality is, I say all the time, in Australia, as a country of 25 million people, if I wanted to find engineers that, can scale to hundreds of millions of people, very difficult. Like our biggest, national applications don't have to support that many people, right? Census is our number one thing, and census goes down every time, we have census. So we're not very good at that sort of scale. Here, I could literally throw rocks out the window here and hit 5 engineers that work at that scale now. So in terms of like the effectiveness of networking is far different here, because I'm just far more likely to be connecting with people like extremely relevant. And, every person that I connect to here that is relevant also knows 5 other people that are very relevant. So I just find that it takes less energy to find really good people, or really relevant people for what I'm looking to do. It's not going to be the same with every industry and every category, but for our type of business, that's the difference between here in Australia.
Awesome. I've got a question for Tanya from Anne-Marie Walton. Do you see the US as your biggest growth market now, and do you have a team based there?
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Yes, we definitely see the US as our biggest growth market because, unfortunately, America suffers one of the greatest sort of crime rates and statistics of crime. So wherever that, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
And yeah, we're on our 3rd attempt at building a team, but we believe that we have a small, little, gifted, passionate team there now who are very right for us. So that has been incredibly important, and we've learned a lot of lessons along the way that obviously we don't have enough time to kind of talk about here, but I've mentioned a couple of them. So like with Dom, just finding the people that are really passionate, really passionate, and hop on board your vision bus and are happy to take that ride with you is just super important. I don't think I can emphasize that, and I think we all probably agree with that. You can't emphasize that enough. There's a lot of we found that when we spoke to people in the US, there's lots of shiny, sparkly things, and there's a new, different idea and concept coming around the corner, every day or second day, and obviously the US is a very busy place, and so it's very difficult to get some bandwidth and to get some vision, I guess. So to find those people that are passionate to stick with you rather than ones that want to hop on the bus, have a quick little look and then hop off because the next shiny, sparkly bus is driving by and they want to get on that one and have a look at that one as well. So that is just so critical. And so finding, good people for us. Obviously, bootstrapping, it means that, we're not able to, unfortunately, go from, 2 people to 65, but then we don't actually need that either. So, sometimes having a large team actually causes large problems as well, because you've got the everyday problems that people bring with them into their jobs. So that can be challenging. So I think we're very fortunate in that our tech is done. We've built it. We've done all the proof of concept. We've shown how effective and efficient it is over here in Australia, and so that has been of benefit to us. And America being the one of, unfortunately, the biggest crime countries globally, but also has a really good judiciary system. So I think that that's really important. Like, one of the reasons we haven't gone to South Africa, for instance, or to South America, really high crime continents, but doesn't have a solid judiciary that sits behind it. So, if the criminal is not fearful of conviction and actually landing up years in jail, then, the carrot and stick approach doesn't really work. So if there's no reason for us to spend time, money, energy, and resources going to countries where people can bribe their way out of jail. That just doesn't make sense. So.
All right, we're going to do one more question, and let each of you give some sort of wrap-up comment you'd like to, as well at the very end. So one is for Michelle. You guys each got one. So many more time. Spark Festival says our time is expired. For Michelle, I love your day one US focus. Have you used country-based champions, health or AI space there?
Sorry, you were cutting out a little bit then. I think the question was, have we used country-based champions?
Country champions within the health or AI space there. And I'm assuming she's meaning us because she said, I love your day focus.
Yeah, I mean, we're expanding heavily to Europe and the UK at the moment, and again, same thing. It's just find those key opinion leaders in the individual different markets. They'll have on-the-ground insights into how to best expand to those markets. So yes, I think it's very important to have not only some of your investor base in those big key markets, but also to have distributed teams, peripheral teams set up in those markets so that they have that kind of on-the-ground experience and develop out those networks. And definitely we have focused on getting key opinion leaders in AI and healthcare within our within our network to help us leverage into those markets.
And you really have done it quite well. I've been watching company. All three of you have been watching for years. It's been a great experience, your various companies. Got about 5 minutes left. Give, a half, 2 minutes to each. Are there any final thoughts that you would like to leave viewers with today around, obviously the theme of our panel was taking your Australian venture global. So one final piece of advice for the folks who are out there watching and listening, but maybe that could be or if you share a 1-minute synopsis of where you're going next with your company, that would be great. So Dom, do you want to get us started?
Sure. Yeah. I think the number one thing, if you want to take your business to the US, is one, you've got to be in a tremendously big market. You need to be going after a big prize. Number two is have a clear way of getting there. At that stage, it shouldn't be an idea. Here, it's a sophisticated market. They're not going to sort of take your idea and sort of back that. They want to see conviction. They want to see you being able to execute. They need to believe that you're going to be able to execute on the vision that you've got. And I would just say, like, generally speaking, the thing that I think has set us up really well, and the reason why we're doing quite well is we just have a sense of urgency to everything that we're doing. Like we have a clear path of what we're doing, and every day we're going out and chipping away as fast as we can at executing on that vision, and that's really what you've got to have. And I think that you can see that, you can see it in progress we're making, and people who are backing us on that. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Have you got a 1-minute wrap up or final thoughts for our viewers and our listeners?
Yeah. Look, I appreciate everything that Dom has said. And I definitely agree with him in certain sectors, and certainly probably from a digital perspective, that's what the US is looking for. But I just like to leave a message for those that are not working in that space. There are definitely entrepreneurs and startups that don't fit in that box, and growing as fast as you can, as quickly as you can, is not always going to be the winning formula for every single startup out there. So don't lose confidence if that's not you. Just be passionate. Make sure that you know that you're solving a really big problem. And for every one of us, every single one of us is disrupting the current thought of the legacy products that are out there that approach the problem at the moment. And so we're always going to be probably challenging the accepted, thought leaders and experts in the field, and they're not going to like it. So, when you're doing innovation, really true innovation, there's going to be a lot of pushback because the current people in the market have accepted those legacy technologies and legacy products and haven't thought outside of the box like we all have. So getting that pushback sometimes is validation for the fact that you do have, a good idea, but good ideas are not necessarily always embraced quickly by different sectors, just because other people have, their own, I guess their own ego involved, I guess, for want of a better word, and they've invested themselves for many years, and so we all work in a space where it's challenging. We're all being, we're all challenging the current status quo. So being passionate, and as Michelle said, getting out there and knowing that your technology is world class, and knowing that you are doing things not just differently, but more cost effectively, or delivering a better product in a quicker way to your customer segment, is so critically important. And just keep hold of that and don't lose faith.
All right, Michelle, how fast can you talk? The two of us together.
I can talk very fast.
We have a minute and 21 seconds. So I'm happy to cede most of that to you, but I have a few final closing things I want to leave the audience with. So any final comments from you in 30 to 45 seconds?
I'll be 30 seconds. I'll give you a new saying. I like Dom's comments, like it being work like a cat on the hot tin roof. Just constantly work to add value every day. Have the confidence to view your product in a global marketplace if it's a global product, and just get out there and just really, it's about passion, but it's about confidence, and it's about execution. You have to have a plan. Don't go to the US for the sake of it. Have a plan and execute well. There you go.
Brilliant, as usual, Michelle, brilliant. Well, what I will leave our listeners with is a little bit of a pitch for the United States, specifically for the market that I am most familiar with, which is Denver Boulder. We have just launched a new global landing pad program through the city of Denver, and we will be running an exclusively Australian, New Zealand cohort beginning in April of 2021. We last year here put out in early stage capital nearly $1 billion. And for reference, the whole state of Colorado is about the size of Queensland, maybe a little bit bigger in population. So we're doing lots of exciting things over here in America. And if I can help any of you in any way, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm sure Spark Festival's got my contact information. And I want to thank Michelle, Tanya, and Dom for time out of their busy schedules to address everybody here at Spark today. So thank you, and Sparkers, have a great rest of your festival.